Hey, welcome to Vance Tried It. Today we're going to be making some slow cooker beef and noodles. So we're going to start off with the beef, and then once this is done cooking, that's going to be about 9 hours. Then we're going to go ahead and make some homemade noodles, cook those right in with the beef, and then we will be ready for a delicious meal. We're going to start off by seasoning this meat. Now I have a little rule: when to brown the meat and when not to brown the meat. So typically I will brown the meat if I'm cooking it on the stovetop, if I'm using a Dutch oven or something like that. If I'm putting it in the slow cooker, I typically don't brown it unless it's a special occasion and I just want to go above and beyond for whoever I'm cooking the meal for. But typically you get enough flavor if you just use a good seasoning and cook it well. So we're going to start off with this. What I have is some Buc-ee's round up steak seasoning, and we're just going to liberally put some of that on there. And then in addition, I'm going to put some onion powder and some garlic powder. And then I'm going to take my handy dandy little kitchen glove here. And I'm just going to work this seasoning right here into the meat. And kind of rub it down onto the sides and onto the end. Just really kind of massage it in there. I'm going to turn it over to the other side. Do the same thing again. And just really rub that in there. Now, here's the thing. When you're doing this, you're going to get some of the seasoning that's going to fall off onto your, typically I use a cutting board. And this is where I will take the sides and the ends, and I will just press them down onto the board in those spots where I can see some loose seasoning, and that's kind of how I make sure I get the sides and the ends just like that. Now we're going to put this in our slow cooker with the fat side up. This is a chuck roast, and so it may, or depending on what type of chuck roast you get, this is what's called a tender chuck roast, and you can just have a basic chuck roast. If it has a fat side, put the fat side up so that when that fat renders, it soaks down into the meat. And so it was that simple, just to season it. And then we're just going to add to this 4 cups of beef broth. And I typically will pour it kind of to the side. And that pretty much covers that. And we have our slow cooker set on low. And we're going to cook this for 9 hours. This is pretty much, we're stewing this meat. And so the roast is almost completely covered. And so all of that juice is going to permeate throughout there. And it's going to cook right in there. And that also is going to mean that when we cook those noodles in there, we're going to have that beautiful broth that we're cooking those noodles in, and those noodles are going to really soak up that flavor. So that's one of the reasons that we're going to stew it and use lots of that beef broth in there. So I'm going to see you in about 9 hours for me, and for you it'll just be a few seconds. Okay, so we are approaching the 9-hour mark on our roast, and so that means we're ready to start making the noodles. Now, I love some homemade noodles. When I was a kid, my mom would make homemade noodles quite a bit. Now, she usually used it with chicken, but you know how kids gotta find their own way in the world. Well, that's me, and I really like beef more than chicken. I eat chicken, but beef is really my go-to, and so that's why I'm doing this with beef today. But the noodles are going to be pretty much just like my mama made. And so we're going to start off with a couple of eggs, and these are room temperature eggs. So there's 2 eggs. And there's 1 tablespoon of milk in there. And there's 1 teaspoon of olive oil in there. Extra virgin. And we're going to take all that and we're going to use our whisk and just get it all whisked up here. And then what I have in this bowl here is 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And I've gone ahead and I have whisked this. So instead of a sifter, I always use a whisk. And so pretty much if I'm going to be making something and it's going to call for flour, I'm going to whisk it. So I went ahead and whisked this up. I'm going to put about half of this in here. About like that. And we're just going to start really incorporating this in here together. Just like this. And I'm just going to start going, about a quarter at a time. And I have now reached the end of the usefulness of the whisk. And so we're going to get out a spatula spoon. A spatula that is rounded and kind of also works as a spoon. And so that's what we're going to be using. So let's get all this dough off of here that we can. Don't want to leave any of the goodness stuck on the whisk. There we go. Set that over there. A little bit more flour. So I like to just use the spoon or the spatula just to kind of press it together in here like this. And then eventually you'll reach a point where it is dry enough where you're probably going to start to need to use your hands at this point. So now I can go ahead, since I'm getting my hands dirty anyway, get some of this dough off of here. Now, if I was smart, I would have grabbed some of my gloves. Not because my hands are dirty, I just washed them, but because they keep stuff from getting in between your fingernails and stuff. So I like to use gloves, but I didn't grab any, so I'm going to go ahead and grab this until we get this all really incorporated well together. Just like this. And it's a little bit dry, but that's all right. So you never know. It typically comes down to the eggs, because depending on how big the eggs are is depending on what you're going to get in here. So, but I don't want to put another egg in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit more milk. And I'll just put a touch more milk in here. Doesn't need to be a lot. Just enough to get that to where it's nice and doughy. And if you just add a little bit of it at a time, then you'll start to see what you need here. I think probably still a little bit more milk. That's just about where we're looking for. You want a nice doughy consistency. You want it to be a little bit wet to the touch because we're going to end up adding some flour to this when we need it. So I have that dough ready. I'm going to just set this right in the bowl, just like this. And we're going to let that set for about 10 minutes. And after it has set up, then we're going to go ahead and roll it out and get our noodles all ready to go. So now that we have our dough where we want it as far as moisture goes, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to put it out onto a sheet of wax paper here. Let me just get a little bit of my hands washed off here. Okay, so what I've done is I've gotten this wax paper out and I've laid it out here to just kind of give us a good surface to work on. And now we're just going to take a little bit of flour and we're going to sprinkle it on here just to kind of give our surface the ability to not let the dough stick to it. And now we're going to take this dough and we're just going to knead it. So you're basically just taking and you're folding it over and like this. Just working it all in together really well here. And that's what I said. Remember I said we're going to be adding a little bit of flour to this. This is what I'm talking about. All right? And so you will start to feel as you're done, as you're kneading this, kind of what it feels like in here, and it's getting firmer. And what we're really looking for is we're looking for it to get just a little less sticky. So we wanted it sticky in the beginning because we needed to knead it. Yeah, that's true. But that's a lot of kneading, huh? So we wanted to get this. We don't want it completely dry. So we want it to be, I don't know, maybe the best word is tacky. To where you can feel it coming off of your hands really well. And you don't have any dough sticking to your hands. But you can, it's, you know, it feels kind of like, I suppose, the consistency of, oh, you know, like that putty you get to put stuff on walls. That should be kind of the feeling of it right here. So after we've kneaded a few times, it feels just kind of the way we want it, then we are going to just let it sit here for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to roll it out and we're going to cut it up into noodles. So I'll see you in about 10 minutes. Okay, so it has been 10 minutes and we're ready to roll this dough out. We're just going to get a little bit of flour on each side. And this is where I think we're going to need the double sheet of parchment paper. And so, now obviously if you have a big counter, you can do this without the parchment paper and just do it on the counter. But I don't really have the counter space to do that. And so I'm kind of stuck doing it like this, which is not the ideal situation because this parchment paper moves around a lot. But we're going to work with it because it's what we have to work with. We want this rolled out pretty thin. So the nice thing about the parchment paper is I can just move the parchment paper around just kind of like that. And going like that and keep on rolling it. And when I get done rolling this out, I will get back to you and we will be ready to cut it. Okay, so as you can probably see here, we have gotten these noodles pretty thin here. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get me a pizza cutter, and that's what I'm going to cut these with. Just this little bad boy right here. And we'll just start over here. And we want to go about, I don't know, quarter to half an inch, somewhere in there. They don't have to be perfectly the same size, just approximately, because that's kind of the charm of homemade noodles, right? They're not all exactly the same. And I tell you what, for some reason, I'm having a trouble not just widening out as I cut these along the way. So I'm really having to really focus on keeping a good line and even running it back in towards the middle here. And now I'm going the other direction with it. And we're going to do about one more here. And then we'll just, I'm going to take some of these off of here. So you can see how they come out just like this. This is exactly what they should be. And then I'm just going to run that bad boy there. And just pull them apart just like this. Set them off to the side. Just whatever length you want. Just want to make sure that they're kind of pulled apart. I'm going to go probably one more cut here. Let's go there. These look like they're good. Tear that one off. Okay, so this is our noodles, and look, here's the thing, you can use store-bought noodles, but I can just tell you this, they're not going to be as good as these. And the other thing is, if you use store-bought noodles, then you're going to have to add some thickener to your beef. Because when we put these noodles in here to cook, since there's flour on these noodles, it's going to thicken up our broth. And so if you use store-bought noodles, they're not going to have that coating of flour on them, and it's not going to thicken up. It's not going to have the same consistency of what we really want. And so you can just use some cornstarch or something like that to add some thickener in there, but you will need some sort of thickener. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and shred up this beef. because it should be done, done, done. Let me get this flour out the way. There we go. Whew. And I'm just going to pull this bad boy right out of here. And it is already just breaking apart super nice. You can see how easy that just breaks apart. You don't even need, I have, some claws that can kind of use to break stuff up like this, but don't even need it for this. This is how beautifully they just come apart, and it just shreds right there. Just perfect. That is beautiful right there. In fact, before we even keep going, let's just give this meat a try. See how delicious it is. Yeah, that is good stuff right there. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to put our beef back in the broth, just like that. And then we're going to add this noodles in here. We're just going to kind of sprinkle them in there just like that. You don't want to put them in there in a big clump. And then just gently stir them around a little bit. Get them covered with that broth. Just like that. Make sure they're all submerged in there. Oh, that's beautiful. Now what we're going to do is we're going to close our lid and we're going to let this cook still on low for another 40-45 minutes. We're going to let those noodles cook, absorb that broth, thicken that broth, and then we're going to have some delicious beef and noodles when we get done in about 45 minutes. Okay, our noodles should be fully cooked up now, and we are ready to eat this. So let's dig in right here, and we will just scoop us out a batch of this, just like that. Well, let's just try the noodle first off, just with a little bit of broth. I love a good homemade noodle. It just is so good. Just has that down home taste. Let's try it now with the beef. I mean, the noodle just by itself is really good. The noodle with the beef is amazing. And I tell you what you could do if you really wanted to kick this up another level. Make some mashed potatoes and put this over some mashed potatoes. Wow. It would be like you were in heaven. So hey, when it comes to this homemade noodles and beef, I tried it. You should too.